The air in America, heavy and thick with the humidity of late summer and political schism, was about to be charged with a new current. The year was 2019, a prelude to a storm. And the fault lines of the nation's political bedrock were already groaning under immense pressure. In the gilded halls of Mar-a-Lago, and from the churning, incandescent stage of his rallies, the 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, was crafting a narrative. It was not a story of policy or governance, but one of personality, of family, and of alleged corruption, aimed squarely at the man who was emerging as his most formidable potential challenger for the presidency, Joseph R. Biden Jr. The first whispers of the story did not concern taxes. They concerned a country thousands of miles away, Ukraine, and a natural gas company, Burisma Holdings. The president's focus was on Biden's son, Hunter. It held a lucrative position on Burisma's board while his father, as vice president, was the Obama administration's point man on Ukraine policy. From the presidential podium and the unfiltered feed of his Twitter account, a question was repeatedly forcefully posed. Why was the vice president's son, with no discernible experience in the energy sector, being paid so handsomely by a Ukrainian firm? The implication was hung in the air, a ponderous, accusatory cloud. It was a question of influence, of access. Of the blurred lines where family and power intersect, the narrative gained its first official, institutional vessel not in a courtroom but through a phone call. On July 25, 2019, the Oval Office, a room steeped in the gravity of American history, became the setting for a conversation that would ignite an impeachment. President Trump spoke with the newly elected president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. In the conversation, the American president mentioned the Bidens. He asked for a favor. He wanted an investigation into Burisma and the Bidens. The request, once revealed by a whistleblower, sent shockwaves through Washington. It was seen by Democrats as a clear abuse of power, a president using the leverage of his office to solicit foreign interference in an American election by damaging a political rival. The House of Representatives, controlled by the Democratic Party, moved with swift and solemn purpose. Impeachment proceedings began. The White House, for its part, remained defiant. The president's defenders framed the call as a legitimate inquiry into potential corruption. The focus, they insisted, should be on the original question, on the propriety of Hunter Biden's business dealings. The narrative was bifurcating, splitting the nation into two viewing audiences, watching two entirely different programs. Saw a president subverting the Constitution. The other saw a president bravely taking on a corrupt establishment embodied by the Bidens. The impeachment trial in the Senate, with its foregone conclusion of acquittal by the Republican majority, did little to resolve the schisma. It merely hardened it. Joe Biden, throughout this period, navigated the storm with a practiced political stoicism, defended his son, but largely kept the specific allegations at arm's length, framing the entire affair as a desperate, baseless smear campaign orchestrated by a president who feared facing him in the general election. His public posture was one of paternal concern, mixed with presidential gravitas, a refusal to be dragged into the mud. He was campaigning on a return to normalcy, a restoration of the soul of the nation, and this sordid affair was, in his telling, a prime example of the very abnormality he sought to vanquish. His silence on the specifics was a strategy. Engaging with the details, his campaign believed, would only lend them a legitimacy they did not deserve. Then, in the final, frantic weeks before the 2020 election, the narrative took a sharp, dramatic turn. The story shifted from the esoteric world of Ukrainian oligarchs to a humble computer repair shop in Wilmington, Delaware. In October 2020, the New York Post published a bombshell report. A laptop allegedly dropped off at the shop by Hunter Biden in April 2019 for repair, but never retrieved, was now in the hands of the FBI and through a copy of its hard drive, in the possession of Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. The Post's story was built around emails purportedly found on the laptop. The most explosive of these suggested that Hunter Biden had arranged a meeting between his father, then the vice president, and a top executive from Burisma. This directly contradicted Joe Biden's long-standing assertion that he had never discussed His son's overseas business dealings with him. The story was electric. A potential October surprise of immense proportions. It seemed to provide a tangible link, a digital thread connecting Joe Biden to the very influence-peddling operation that Trump had been alleging for over a year. The Trump campaign seized upon it with ferocious energy. It was the laptop from hell, proof of the Biden crime family's corruption. At rallies, the crowds, already primed by months of accusations, chanted with renewed vigor. The story dominated conservative media, a constant, looping indictment of the Democratic nominee. The reaction from the broader media and the national security establishment was one of profound skepticism and caution. The story's provenance was murky, its timing highly convenient for the Trump campaign. Carried all the hallmarks, many argued, of a foreign disinformation campaign. A letter signed by 51 former senior intelligence officials was publicly released, stating that the laptop story had all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. This letter became a powerful shield for the Biden campaign. When the topic was raised during the final presidential debate, Joe Biden pointed to the letter, dismissing the entire affair as a Russian plant. He looked directly at his opponent and declared the accusations false, a distraction from the real issues facing the country. Social media platforms, wary of repeating their experience with foreign interference in 2016, took the extraordinary step of limiting the story's reach. Twitter blocked the New York Post's account and prevented users from sharing the article's link. The national conversation was effectively choked off. For a crucial period, the story was contained, framed not as a potential scandal about the Biden's but as a story about Russian disinformation and the responsible handling of unverified claims. The Biden campaign's strategy of strategic silence on the specifics, now bolstered by the intelligence community's assessment, held firm. The election came and went. Joe Biden won. Laptop story for a time seemed to fade into the partisan ether, a footnote in a bitter campaign. But the embers of the story did not die out. They smoldered in the conservative press and in the minds of millions of voters who believed a major scandal had been deliberately suppressed. And quietly, behind the scenes, a real, formal investigation was already underway. In December 2020, after the election was settled, Hunter Biden himself released a statement. He confirmed that the U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware was investigating his tax affairs. The statement was brief, professional, and stated that he was confident a professional and objective review of these matters will demonstrate that I handled my affairs legally and appropriately. This was a pivotal moment. The story was no longer just a political narrative spun by Trump or a dubious report in a tabloid. It was now a confirmed federal criminal investigation. The U.S. Attorney for the District of Delaware, David Weiss, Trump appointee, whom the new Biden administration would endowed to institutional continuity, keep in place to finish his work, was now the central, if silent, figure in the drama. As the Biden administration began, the narrative again split. For the White House and its supporters, the investigation was a personal matter for the president's son, wholly separate from the president himself. The president, when asked, would express love and support for his son, who had publicly struggled with addiction, but would offer no comment on the ongoing investigation. This was the wall. Personal was separate from the professional. The son's business was his son's business. The silence was deliberate. A reinforcement of the boundary between the Department of Justice and the White House. A boundary the new administration accused its predecessor of repeatedly violating. For Donald Trump, now out of office, but still the gravitational center of the Republican Party, for his allies in Congress and the media, this silence was an admission of guilt. Investigation into Hunter Biden's taxes, they argued, was inextricably linked to the larger story of the UHE family's international business dealings. The core of their allegation was that Hunter Biden and other members of the Biden family had leveraged their name and connection to Joe Biden to secure lucrative contracts and payments from foreign entities in countries like China, Ukraine, and Romania. These payments, the theory went, were not for any legitimate services rendered, but for access and influence. And if these payments were not properly reported, or if they were structured in a way to obscure their origin and purpose, that was where the tax investigation became the thread that could unravel the entire tapestry. The story lay relatively dormant for the first 2 years of the Biden presidency, the investigation proceeding slowly and out of public view. But the 2022 midterm elections changed the political calculus entirely. Republicans won back control of the House of Representatives, and with it, the power of the gavel and the subpoena. Smoldering embers of the Biden family narrative were about to be doused with gasoline. James Comer, a Republican from Kentucky, became the new chairman of the House Oversight Committee. Jim Jordan of Ohio took the helm of the Judiciary Committee. From the moment they took power, their mission was clear and publicly stated: to investigate the Biden family. The focus was now explicitly on Joe Biden himself. The central, explosive question they sought to answer was whether Joe Biden, as vice president or as a private citizen, had been involved in, profited from, or taken any official action to benefit his family's foreign business dealings. The committees began their work with a fusillade of information requests and subpoenas. They demanded access to a specific type of financial document, suspicious activity reports, or SARS. These are reports that banks are required to file with the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, when they spot transactions that could be indicative of money laundering or other illegal activities. The mere existence of a SAR is not proof of wrongdoing, but the committees believed that a pattern of them, connected to the Biden family and their associates, would paint a damning picture. The Treasury Department initially resisted turning over the documents, citing confidentiality rules and the ongoing nature of the Justice Department's investigation. This resistance itself became part of the narrative, framed by Republicans as a deep state cover-up, an attempt by the Biden administration to protect its own. After a protracted standoff, Chairman Comer eventually gained access. What followed was a series of press conferences and public statements that brought the financial intricacies of the story to the forefront. Comer, often standing before complex charts filled with names, arrows, and dollar amounts, alleged the discovery of a sprawling network of shell companies and complicated financial transactions. He claimed that the Biden family and their associates had received millions of dollars from foreign sources. He pointed to wire transfers from Chinese state-linked energy companies and payments from Romanian businessmen. The narrative was that these were not legitimate business earnings, but part of a deliberate, coordinated effort to enrich the family by selling the Biden brand. The White House and Democratic lawmakers pushed back hard. They accused Comer of mischaracterizing the evidence, of cherry-picking transactions, of creating a conspiracy theory out of normal, albeit complex, business activities undertaken by private citizens. They pointed out that Comer's charts never showed a direct payment to Joe Biden himself. The president's name might be invoked by his son or brother in their business pitches, but there was no proof. They argued that he was a party to the deals or a recipient of the funds. The Republican investigation, they charged, was a political stunt, a revenge tour for the 2 Trump impeachments. Designed to damage the president ahead of the 2024 election, the tension escalated dramatically. With the emergence of 2 IRS whistleblowers, Gary Shapley, a veteran IRS criminal investigator, and Joseph Sigler, a special agent who had worked on the Hunter Biden tax case for years, came forward with explosive allegations. They testified before the House Ways and Means Committee first, in closed-door depositions, and then in a blockbuster public hearing. Their testimony, delivered with the dry precision of career civil servants, was a bombshell. They alleged that the Justice Department's investigation into Hunter Biden had been consistently slow-walked and mishandled. They claimed that recommendations for more aggressive investigative steps and felony charges had been stymied by higher-ups. Shapley alleged that U.S. Attorney David Weiss had told multiple officials in a private meeting that he was not the ultimate decider on whether to bring charges and that he had been denied the authority to bring charges in other jurisdictions, like Washington, D.C. and California, where Hunter Biden had lived and worked. This directly contradicted the public statements of Attorney General Merrick Garland, who had repeatedly assured Congress that Weiss had full authority to conduct his investigation and bring charges wherever he saw fit. The whistleblower's testimony created a firestorm. 2. Republicans. It was the smoking gun they had been looking for. Direct evidence of political interference from the highest levels of the Biden Justice Department to protect the president's son. Donald Trump amplified their claims relentlessly on his social media platform, Truth Social. The whistleblowers were patriots, he declared. Their testimony was proof that the entire system was rigged and corrupt. The Justice Department and David Weiss pushed back, issuing statements that, while carefully worded, denied the whistleblower's central claim that Weiss lacked ultimate authority. The narrative was now a dizzying vortex of claims and counterclaims. He said battle between career investigators and their politically appointed superiors. The truth was buried under layers of legalese and partisan spin. In the midst of this political inferno, the legal case against Hunter Biden seemed to be reaching a resolution. In June 2023, the Justice Department announced that it had reached a plea agreement with Hunter Biden's lawyers. Under the terms of the deal, he would plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax offenses for failing to pay his taxes on time in 2017 and 2018. In a separate agreement, he would enter a diversion program related to a felony gun charge he had purchased a firearm in 2018 while, by his own admission in his memoir, being a user of illegal drugs, which is a federal crime. The deal meant that Hunter Biden would almost certainly avoid any prison time. Republicans erupted in outrage. They branded it a sweetheart deal, a slap on the wrist, and further proof of a 2-tiered system of justice. The plea agreement, they charged, was a deliberate attempt to shut down the broader investigation and prevent any further embarrassing revelations about the Biden family from emerging in a public trial. The timing, coming so soon after the whistleblower testimony, seemed deeply suspect to them. Trump called it a massive cover-up. The scene then shifted to a federal courthouse in Wilmington, Delaware, for what was expected to be a routine plea hearing. The room was packed with press, the air thick with anticipation. But the hearing, presided over by U.S. District Judge Mary Ellen Noreika, an appointee of Donald Trump, quickly went off the rails. The judge began to ask pointed, probing questions about the specifics of the deal. She focused on the diversion agreement for the gun charge, which contained an unusual provision granting Hunter Biden broad immunity from prosecution for a range of other potential crimes, including those related to his foreign business dealings, that Congress was investigating. A quiet disagreement between the prosecutors and the defense attorneys, played out in open court, revealed a fundamental misunderstanding about the scope of the immunity clause. The prosecution seemed to believe it was narrow. The defense believed it was broad. Judge Noreika, sensing the confusion and the unusual nature of the arrangement, balked. She expressed concerns that the deal was not straightforward and that her role was being contorted into rubber stamping an agreement she did not fully understand. With the two sides unable to clarify the terms to her satisfaction, she refused to accept the plea agreement. The deal, which was supposed to be the end of the story, it spectacularly collapsed in real time. The collapse of the plea deal was a stunning development. It breathed new life into the Republican investigation and cast a shadow over the Justice Department. The carefully constructed wall between the White House and the Hunter Biden case was crumbling. Shortly thereafter, Attorney General Garland, facing immense political pressure and accusations of a cover-up, took another extraordinary step. He appointed U.S. Attorney David Weiss as a special counsel in the case. This designation granted Weiss a greater degree of independence and broader authority, the very authority the whistleblowers had claimed he previously lacked. To Democrats, this was a move to ensure impartiality and transparency. To Republicans, it was a tacit admission that the previous investigation had been flawed, a desperate attempt to clean up a political mess. With the protection of the plea deal gone, Hunter Biden's legal jeopardy intensified. In September 2023, the new special counsel secured an indictment against him on the federal gun charge. Then, in December, a second, far more detailed indictment was handed down in California. This was the tax case, but now it was not 2 misdemeanors. It was a 9-count indictment, including 3 felony charges. alleging a 4-year scheme to evade at least $1.4 million in federal taxes. The tax indictment was a narrative document in its own right. In painstaking detail, prosecutors laid out a life of extravagant spending on drugs, escorts, luxury hotels, and exotic cars, all while they alleged deliberately failing to pay his taxes. The document detailed the sources of his income, including his work for Burisma and a Chinese private equity fund, while the indictment focused solely on Hunter Biden's personal conduct and did not mention or charge his father. The details it contained provided a mountain of fresh material for the president's political opponents. Dollars spent, every luxury enjoyed, was woven back into the broader Republican narrative of a corrupt family that saw itself as above the law. The House Republican investigation, running parallel to the criminal case, reached its own crescendo. Based on the testimony of the whistleblowers, the financial records they had obtained, and the testimony of former business associates of Hunter Biden like Devon Archer, who testified that the value of the Biden brand was central to their business and that Joe Biden had been put on speakerphone during business meetings to sell the illusion of access, House Republicans took their final, most potent step. In December 2023, the House of Representatives voted, along strict party lines, to formally open an impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden. The articles of impeachment were not yet written, but the grounds for the inquiry were clear. Republicans alleged that Joe Biden had abused his power, been involved in corruption, and obstructed justice. They pointed to his interactions with his son's business partners, to the financial trails uncovered by the Oversight Committee, and to the alleged interference in the Justice Department investigation. The impeachment inquiry hung over the presidency as the nation entered the 2024 election year, a stark symbol of the unbridgeable chasm between the two parties. The president and the White House maintained their posture of complete denial and defiance. They dismissed the impeachment inquiry as a baseless political stunt. They argued that after a year of investigation, Republicans had failed to produce a single shred of evidence of wrongdoing by the president himself. No proof of a direct payment, no evidence that any official act had been taken by Joe Biden in exchange for money. The entire case, they insisted, was a web of innuendo, misdirection, and lies, designed for one purpose: to help Donald Trump return to the White House. The president's silence on the specifics of his son's case was now framed as a profound respect for the rule of law, a refusal to interfere, in stark contrast to his predecessor. That silence, which his opponents called damning, was presented by his allies as principled. The stage was set for a final, grinding confrontation. In the courts, a president's son faced the prospect of multiple criminal trials, his personal struggles, and financial misdeeds set to be laid bare for the world to see. In the halls of Congress, a president faced an impeachment inquiry driven by his political enemies, a process that threatened to paralyze his administration and tarnish his legacy, regardless of the outcome. And on the campaign trail, Donald Trump, the originator of the narrative, watched as the story he had set in motion years earlier dominated the national conversation. He had successfully made the Biden family's finances and alleged tax issues a central theme of American political life. He had gained immense political momentum, casting his rival as the head of a corrupt enterprise, a charge that resonated deeply with his supporters and sowed doubt in the minds of undecided voters. The drama, however, was not destined for a clean resolution. The impeachment inquiry in the House, despite its formal launch, began to lose steam. Key witnesses failed to provide the direct link to presidential misconduct that Republicans had hoped for. The complex financial charts, while visually compelling, to a base audience, proved difficult to translate into a simple, coherent case of high crimes and misdemeanors for the general public. The inquiry, which had begun with a roar, was beginning to fade into a partisan whimper, overshadowed by the looming election, the real climax. The true fall from grace occurred not in the Oval Office but in that same Wilmington courthouse where the plea deal had once collapsed. In June 2024, Hunter Biden was put on trial for the 3 felony gun charges. The prosecution's case was simple and devastating. Built on his own words from his memoir and the testimony of those who knew him, during his darkest days of addiction, the defense argued that he did not knowingly lie on the federal form, but the evidence was overwhelming. After a brief deliberation, the jury returned its verdict: guilty on all counts. A sitting president's son was now a convicted felon. The verdict was a moment of profound personal tragedy for the Biden family. A pain the president acknowledged in a brief, somber statement expressing his love and support as a father, yet it was also a moment of strange and complex political vindication. The conviction, delivered by a jury of ordinary citizens in his family's hometown, seemed to undercut the Republican narrative of a rigged justice system. The Department of Justice, under a Biden-appointed attorney general, had successfully prosecuted the president's own son. Democrats pointed to it as proof that no one was above the law in the Biden administration. But the story was not over. The California tax trial still loomed, promising an even more detailed and politically damaging excursion into the world of foreign payments and lavish spending. And here, the final, unresolved twist in the narrative settled over the nation: the relentless Republican investigation, amplified by Donald Trump, had succeeded in exposing the deeply problematic and ethically questionable financial dealings of the president's son. It had resulted in a felony conviction and a pending trial on serious tax charges. It had confirmed that Hunter Biden had traded on his family name to make millions, and then failed to pay the taxes he owed on that income. Yet after years of searching, after sifting through thousands of pages of bank records and hours of testimony, the investigation had failed to prove its central thesis that Joe Biden himself was a corrupt actor who had sold the power of his office. The investigation had destroyed the son's reputation and created a constant, damaging political headache for the father, but it had never produced the irrefutable evidence needed to remove the president from office, or, for many Americans to justify the scale and ferocity of the inquiry. The nation was left in a state of permanent cognitive dissonance. For half the country, the story was about a brave President Trump, who had exposed a criminal family, in a justice system that had only belatedly and partially held one of them to account for a fraction of their alleged crimes. For the other half, the story was about the cynical and destructive weaponization of congressional power and the tragic personal failings of a president's son, exploited without mercy for political gain. There was no shared truth, no common verdict. The silence from the White House was either the dignified stoicism of a father respecting the rule of law, or the damning reticence of a man with something to hide. The noise from Mar-a-Lago was either the righteous roar of a truth-teller, or the self-serving propaganda of a political arsonist. The saga, born in the crucible of partisan warfare, ended not with a clear judgment, but with the fracturing of reality itself, leaving the American public to choose its own narrative, a choice that would define the political landscape for years to come. The question of guilt or innocence had been subsumed by the question of which story you chose to believe. And in that ambiguity, the controversy thrived, an unresolved, festering wound on the body politic